Have you ever felt God calling you gently, yet you push the moment aside as if it could wait? Have you ever sensed a whisper in your heart urging you toward goodness, only to silence it with distractions? And have you ever wondered what happens spiritually, not years later, but instantly, when a soul ignores the grace offered to it in that very moment? In the quiet hours before dawn, when the convent lay wrapped in stillness as soft as cotton, Saint Faustina woke with a weight upon her soul. The candle on her small wooden table flickered weakly, casting trembling shadows across the walls of her cell. She felt Jesus drawing near, not with thunder, not with fire, but with a sorrowful tenderness that she immediately recognized. And in that moment, he revealed to her a truth that pierced deeper than any vision she had ever received. When a soul ignores grace, the divine consequences begin immediately. Subscribe if you wish to walk deeper into the mysteries of divine mercy and the revelations Jesus entrusted to Saint Faustina. As she knelt beside her narrow bed, the cold floor pressing against her knees, Faustina sensed that Jesus wanted her to understand something urgent, something that affects every soul every day, often without us even realizing it. Grace, he showed her, is not a distant idea. It is not something that floats around waiting to be noticed. Grace is an invitation, alive and present, given in real time. And when a soul turns away from it, something shifts instantly inside the heart. Faustina saw this, not with her eyes, but with the clarity Jesus gave to her spirit. She felt the moment grace approached a soul, like a warm breeze brushing against the edge of the heart. It was subtle, gentle, easy to miss. It came in moments of inspiration, quiet urges to pray, sudden tenderness toward others, unexpected remorse, invitations to forgive, chances to choose humility instead of pride. These were not random feelings. They were precise movements of heaven. Yet many souls, she realized, dismiss these moments. They hesitate, they postpone, they resist, they numb themselves with busyness. And the instant grace is ignored, Jesus let her feel the consequence. The heart hardens, even if only slightly. A spiritual door that had opened quietly begins to close. A softness inside the soul becomes a little more rigid, not as punishment, but as a natural result of turning away from the one who knocks. Faustina felt this reality unfold like a scene before her. She sensed a soul experiencing a sudden insight, a moment where God offered clarity, a gentle push toward repentance. But instead of responding, the soul brushed it aside, choosing convenience over conversion. And instantly, the light dimmed. The warmth faded. The interior landscape of the heart became colder, heavier, lonelier. Jesus made her understand something essential. Every ignored grace strengthens the soul's habit of indifference, and the more the soul ignores, the deeper the consequences become. Not someday, not in the afterlife, now. Faustina bowed her head, trembling, because she knew how often she herself had delayed grace. She remembered moments when God invited her to a deeper surrender, and she hesitated. And she understood why those hesitations always left her feeling empty. In that small cell, surrounded by flickering shadows, she whispered a prayer to Jesus, begging him to make her attentive, always, to his grace. As the morning light gently entered through the small window of her cell, Faustina felt as if the world itself were waking slowly, one breath at a time. She walked through the quiet corridors of the convent, the sound of her footsteps echoing softly against the stone floor. Her heart remained heavy from the revelation Jesus had given her before dawn. Something inside her knew that what she had been shown was not an isolated truth for mystics, but an everyday reality shaping every soul in ways they rarely perceive. During breakfast, as the sisters ate in silence with their heads bowed, Faustina's thoughts drifted to moments when grace had approached her unexpectedly. She remembered a time when a sister spoke harshly to her without reason, and she felt the immediate urge to defend herself. Yet in the same instant, a whisper of grace invited her to choose silence and patience. It was a moment so small it could have passed unnoticed. But she felt clearly now that if she had ignored that whisper, her heart would have hardened in ways she might never have realized. That was the divine consequence Jesus had shown her, the immediate narrowing of the soul's capacity to love. Later that day, While helping in the garden, she watched droplets of water slide from the leaves after a light rain. Each droplet caught the sunlight, scattering it into tiny fragments of color. She felt Jesus draw near again, teaching her through the earth itself. Grace, he showed her, is like rain. When the soil of the heart is open, it absorbs everything, nourishing seeds that will grow in secret. But when the heart is closed, dry or distracted, the rain slips away, and the earth remains barren. Faustina understood that this barrenness is not metaphorical. It is the immediate spiritual consequence experienced by souls when they ignore grace. She had seen it countless times in others, people who resisted small inspirations, postponed acts of charity, silenced the call to prayer, carried grudges instead of forgiving. Their hearts did not suddenly become evil, but something subtle shifted, a heaviness, a distance, an interior fog. They would pray, yet feel nothing. They would seek God, yet sense only silence. They would try to love, yet their hearts felt too tired to respond. This wasn't punishment. It was the natural outcome of turning away from the gentle movement of God. As she knelt to pull a weed from the soil, she felt Jesus speak to her interiorly with deep sadness. "Souls lose grace, not because I withdraw it," he whispered, "but because they drift from me one ignored invitation at a time." Faustina felt the truth of this like a cold wind through her chest. She saw that indifference begins with small refusals, tiny choices made without awareness. But each refusal forms a habit, and each habit shapes the soul. When the bell rang for prayer, Faustina wiped her hands on her apron and hurried inside, whispering a quiet plea that she might never become numb to grace, never delay an invitation from God, never allow her heart to grow cold. As the afternoon settled quietly over the convent, Faustina was asked to assist in the infirmary, where one of the older sisters lay weak from illness. The room was dim, warmed by the soft glow of a small oil lamp beside the bed. Faustina approached gently, sensing the fragility of the moment. There was a tenderness in serving the sick, an intimacy that revealed the state of the heart with startling clarity. And Jesus chose this simple setting to deepen the lesson he had begun earlier. The elderly sister tried to speak, but her strength failed. Faustina held her hand, feeling how cold and thin it had become. In that silence, she suddenly perceived a movement of grace, an invitation for the sister to surrender her suffering to God with trust. But instead of accepting it, the sister's heart recoiled with subtle resistance. Faustina felt it instantly. The woman feared letting go. She feared losing control. She feared giving her pain meaning beyond her understanding. And in that moment, Jesus allowed Faustina to sense the consequence. A shadow passed through the woman's soul, a heaviness that settled over her like a veil. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was simply the immediate dimming of the heart when grace is pushed away. Faustina prayed silently, asking Jesus to surround the sister with mercy. But the message remained clear. Every ignored grace leaves a mark. Not as punishment, but as truth. Grace knocks softly, but when refused, the soul becomes slightly less receptive, slightly less peaceful, slightly less capable of sensing God's nearness. As Faustina left the infirmary, she reflected on her own life. She remembered moments from her youth when she ignored grace because she feared obedience. Times when she felt called to prayer but chose distraction instead. Times when she felt inspired to forgive but clung to hurt. And she understood that the emptiness she had felt afterward wasn't spiritual dryness by chance. It was the direct effect of turning away from what God offered her. Walking through the courtyard, she paused beneath an old tree whose branches reached out like arms longing to embrace the sky. The wind rustled its leaves, creating a soft whisper that filled the space with a sense of quiet urgency. She felt Jesus there, speaking to her without words. Grace, he showed her, is always present, moment by moment, breath by breath. It is the most delicate gift because it respects the freedom of the soul. It offers itself, but it never forces. And when ignored, the soul feels the absence immediately, even if it cannot name the sensation. Faustina knelt beneath the tree, letting the shadows fall across her face. She realized that many souls mistake this loss of grace for abandonment. They think God has turned away from them. But Jesus showed her that the truth is the opposite. Grace withdraws only because it was not welcomed, not because God ceased to love. The divine consequence is the heart's own dullness, the thinning of spiritual sensitivity, the quiet erosion of interior peace. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, that every soul might learn to recognize grace the moment it appears and respond before the heart grows weary of saying no. As the sun began to set behind the convent walls, dyeing the sky in strokes of gold and pale crimson, Faustina walked slowly toward the chapel for evening prayer. The air carried the faint scent of damp earth from the garden, and the first star appeared just above the rooftop, shimmering like a small promise of God's nearness. Yet her heart remained heavy with what Jesus had been revealing, that the divine consequences of ignoring grace unfold not tomorrow, but immediately, in the very breath after refusal. Inside the chapel, a soft candlelight flickered across the tabernacle, casting warm strokes across the wooden pews. Faustina knelt, folding her hands gently. The sisters began singing the evening hymn, their voices rising like a simple, fragile offering. And as their voices filled the room, Jesus allowed Faustina to perceive the interior state of another soul, one that had received a powerful grace earlier in the day, but had chosen to brush it aside. This soul had been invited to forgive someone who had caused it pain. The moment of grace was clear, almost luminous, offering the soul a chance to be free, to breathe again, to loosen the chains of bitterness. But instead of accepting it, the soul clung to resentment, insisting on its own wounded pride. And in the very instant the grace was refused, the soul's interior light dimmed. A spiritual weight settled over it, a heaviness that made prayer feel distant, scripture feel dry, and love feel impossible. Faustina felt this sudden shift so vividly that tears filled her eyes. She realized then that the divine consequences Jesus was showing her were not acts of divine retribution, but acts of divine respect. God never forces healing. He never pushes grace upon a closed door. When a soul says no, heaven steps back, gently, sorrowfully, respectfully, and the soul immediately feels the emptiness that follows. After the hymn ended, Faustina remained kneeling, her forehead resting lightly against her clasped hands. She felt Jesus speak to her heart with a tender sadness. When a soul ignores grace, it becomes vulnerable to temptation, to discouragement, to the illusions of pride. Not because I abandon it, but because the soul has turned from the light that protects it. This, she understood, was the immediacy of divine consequence, the loss of spiritual clarity, the weakening of the will, the quiet fading of interior peace. She remembered moments in her own journey when she had resisted grace, times when Jesus invited her to deeper trust, but fear held her back, times when he offered consolation, but she clung to worry. And she remembered how quickly peace vanished afterward, how the world seemed suddenly louder, heavier, colder. Those experiences now made sense. They had been the immediate fruit of refusing grace. The chapel grew quieter as the sisters filed out one by one. Faustina stayed behind in the dim glow of the candles, her heart trembling with a new understanding. Grace is the lifeblood of the soul. To ignore it, even once, is to wound oneself. But to accept grace, even imperfectly, is to open a door through which God's light floods in. She lifted her eyes toward the tabernacle and whispered, with trembling sincerity, a prayer she hoped every soul would one day pray, Jesus, do not let me miss your grace, not even for a moment. The next morning, as the convent awakened to the quiet rhythm of daily work, Faustina was asked to help in the bakery. Warm air filled the room, and the smell of freshly baked bread wrapped around her like a gentle embrace. The sun entered in golden angles through the small windows, illuminating particles of flour floating in the air. As she kneaded dough with patient, steady movements, she felt Jesus draw near again, deepening the lesson he had been unfolding in her heart. In the midst of the simple task, she sensed the interior state of a soul Jesus wished to show her, someone who had been receiving frequent moments of grace, but consistently postponed responding. The soul was not malicious. It was not defiant. It was simply distracted, always busy, always rushing, always choosing tasks over prayer, noise over silence, comfort over growth. The soul kept telling itself that grace could wait, that it would surrender later, that it would pray later. That conversion could come when things calmed down. But grace does not work that way. As Faustina pressed the dough, she understood with painful clarity that when grace is ignored, it fades. Not because God withdraws, but because the soul loses the capacity to recognize it. And the divine consequence Jesus showed her was immediate and unmistakable. Every later becomes a weakening of desire, a dimming of spiritual hunger. The soul begins to settle for what is easy instead of what is holy. She saw how subtle this decline could be. A soul that once longed for God begins to feel indifferent. A heart that once found joy in prayer starts feeling bored. A conscience that once felt sharp becomes dull, tolerating things it previously avoided. The soul does not fall into darkness all at once. It drifts, one ignored grace at a time. As the sisters moved around her, shaping loaves with quiet discipline, Faustina felt a deep compassion rising within her. She understood now why Jesus urged souls to respond while grace is calling. Grace is like warm bread taken from the oven. It nourishes only when it is received in the moment it is given. If left untouched, it grows hard. The soul that delays its response to God finds that what was once soft and inviting has become difficult to receive. Later that day, Faustina walked past the chapel and paused at the door. She sensed Jesus waiting for her, and as she stepped inside, she felt his presence settle into her heart like a warm cloak. He spoke to her interiorly with a tenderness that bordered on sorrow. Souls suffer unnecessarily because they ignore my grace. They walk in circles asking for answers while refusing the light I place directly before them, and the consequences begin immediately. Confusion, restlessness, the feeling of being spiritually lost. Faustina knelt before the tabernacle, letting these words echo inside her. She felt the weight of souls wandering in self-inflicted darkness, not because God abandoned them, but because grace was refused in the very moment it was offered. She prayed fervently for every person who lived, suspended between God's invitation and their own hesitation. As she rose from prayer, her heart trembled with a final realization. Ignoring grace does not only impoverish the soul, it reshapes its future. Each ignored grace becomes a missed step on the path God has lovingly prepared, and each step missed changes the direction of the entire journey. As evening descended upon the convent, the sky dimmed into a deep blue, and a hush settled over the corridors like a soft veil. Faustina walked alone toward the small garden behind the chapel, seeking silence, seeking understanding. The air was cool, and the scent of damp soil rose gently from the ground. She paused near a wooden bench and sat, folding her hands over her lap as she gazed at the fading light. It was in this stillness that Jesus brought the final piece of the revelation into her heart, something not severe in tone, but urgent in truth. She felt him show her the interior state of one more soul, a soul that had ignored grace for so long that its spiritual senses had grown numb. This soul once felt God's invitations clearly, once recognized his whispers, once responded with eagerness. But little by little, with each postponed surrender, each neglected inspiration, each quiet refusal of humility, the soul had dulled itself. Not out of rebellion, but out of habit. A habit of hesitation, a habit of distraction, a habit of indifference. Faustina felt the sorrow of this reality settle over her. The divine consequence Jesus revealed was immediate, but also cumulative. Every ignored grace constructs a wall inside the soul. Not a tall one, not at first, just a thin layer. A thin layer added to another and another, until the heart feels enclosed in a room without windows. The soul still prays but cannot feel. It still seeks but cannot see. It still hopes, but its hope is faint. Grace had not abandoned it. The soul had simply lost the sensitivity to receive it. The realization pierced Faustina deeply, because she understood that this numbness was not final. Jesus showed her that a single movement of humility, a single moment of sincere surrender, could shatter the layers accumulated by years of ignored grace. What was lost could be restored in an instant if the soul would turn back to him with honesty. But the longer the soul delayed, the harder it became to recognize that it needed saving. The garden grew darker, and the first evening bell rang softly in the distance. Faustina closed her eyes and felt Jesus draw close with a tenderness that made her heart tremble. He made her understand that grace is the language of heaven, spoken continuously, offered constantly, poured out without measure. And the soul that ignores it does not offend God as much as it wounds itself. The divine consequences are immediate because grace is immediate. Its absence is felt the moment it is refused. As she knelt on the cool earth, her habit brushing gently against the grass, she whispered a prayer that rose from the deepest place within her, that souls might awaken before they drift too far, that they might hear grace calling in the small moments, during work, during silence, during conflict, during temptation, and respond before their hearts grow weary of resisting. She prayed that no soul would interpret spiritual numbness as God's abandonment, but as a call to return, a call to begin again, a call to reopen the door that had been closed with so many small refusals. And in the dim garden light, she felt Jesus assure her that every soul that turns back to grace, even after years of ignoring it, is received immediately, fully, tenderly. Faustina rose, her heart at peace, for she knew that even when grace is ignored, mercy waits with infinite patience.